more to do with factors such as their economic strength, their place in the world trade system, rather than simply military might. Do Japan, Germany, Italy, or Canada, all members of the G8, need strategic nuclear weapon systems to wield influence on the world stage? No, they do not. Having said that, of course, the other 4 members of the G8, the USA, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, all have such weapons. The argument goes that the reason why Germany, Japan, and Italy do not have nuclear weapons is that they were on the losing side in the Second World War, and that the absence of nuclear weapons in these countries is therefore simply an accident of history. Well, this may very well be the case, but this historical accident doesn't prevent these countries from exerting immense influence on the world stage.
But sir, these countries have elected in recent years not to adopt quite so controversial a foreign policy. Can you not feel that because of the stance Britain's taken in the Middle East recently, that there's more of a reason for us to have a nuclear system?
No, I actually believe the opposite is the case, because we come under more threat by invading other countries such as we did in Iraq, and I'll come to that in a second too. Now, there is another argument that people use to defend the UK's reinvestment in Trident. It is that the United Kingdom would lose its place as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and therefore its veto. What utter nonsense this argument is. We could, and indeed would, use our veto to reject any motion that came before the Security Council to relieve our country of that privilege, and the privilege it is. To suggest that we rely on our place in the UN on our possession of nuclear weapons is simply surreal. Now, the last purely political argument, wheeled out by those who argue that we need to retain our own independent nuclear deterrent, is that if our special relationship with the USA, the world's only superpower, fails, we will be unprotected against those states that do hold these weapons of mass destruction. They say that we must therefore have our own strategic nuclear weapon, and that Trident is our insurance policy against being left naked and unprotected. Well, let's have a look at our so-called independent nuclear weapon. The whole point about having a strategic nuclear deterrent is that it must be invulnerable to a first strike by the enemy. We aim to have just one nuclear submarine at sea at any time. Yes, one submarine, and one submarine only. Extremely vulnerable to detection, with increasingly sophisticated electronic systems being devised all the time. The warheads for our independent Trident system are manufactured in the USA. The Trident submarines will be serviced in the USA, and while our warheads are to be targeted independently of the Americans, we will have to rely on their satellite systems around the globe for ensuring that our independently targeted missiles can reach their destinations. I leave it to you to assess whether our Trident system is really the independent system the government claimed it to be.
Well, since we're very unlikely, I'm sure even you'd agree, to fire a nuclear missile at America, isn't it okay as long as we can aim it at other countries who don't happen to be America ourselves?
Well, a chill goes down my spine. You can agree that we're not going to fire it at America. I would hope that we would agree that we wouldn't fire it at anybody, whatever the reason. Now, if you really wanted an independent nuclear system, then I would plump for the French force du frappe. A truly independent system, not reliant on the USA for their manufacture, servicing, or indeed satellite navigation systems. Yes, sat-navs we're very used to. You pay your money, though, and you take a choice. The French system is far more expensive. Ours is so much cheaper, even at £25 billion. But the French don't rely on anyone else. They do have an independent nuclear deterrent. One argument which some keep using to defend the indefensible is the argument that we must have these weapons of mass destruction, independent or not, as an insurance policy against aggression and an insurance against the unknown, it's just been alluded to. They argue that simply by having these awesome weapons, we deter any potential aggressor. And the proof of the pudding, if you like, is the fact that the Cold War never became a hot one, and that we preserved the peace in a very divided Europe and a divided world for so long. Now, I have to say, I found this argument very difficult to give much credence to. The very fact that we had millions, and I mean millions, of armed men, myself included, facing each other across the North German plain, conventional bombers able to reach intercontinental targets deep inside both North America and the Soviet Union, meant that even if nuclear weapons were never used, Any war in such circumstances would make the mass destruction and horrors of the Second World War hugely diminished by comparison. No, everyone involved in NATO, yes?
Surely you would agree, though, that part of the deterrent, or the reason for the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons, though, is the total destruction that would be caused, that's simply not present by any other sort of weapon. That's what distinguishes them from something else, and why they're particularly important as a deterrent.
Well, you see, you only got to look at the mass bombing of Japan at the end of the Second World War in 1945, and the firebomb raids, which destroyed far more people than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. We killed masses of people, systematically using a policy of bombing Japanese cities with firebombs. You know, that would destroy their cities and the population and everybody that lived in them. Far more ruthless, in my opinion, than dropping nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, I'll just take 1 minute so we get a little bit. I would say everyone involved in NATO and the Warsaw Pact knew very well, I knew it, everybody else knew it, that whether or not nuclear weapons were ever used, any war between them would end with the destruction of everyone involved. There would be no winners. I'm certainly happy to take an intervention if you wanted to come back.
Well, sir, I was going to bring up the point about Japan. Surely the lesson that we learned from that isn't about nuclear disarmament, but more about the responsible use of the weapons that we do have, because you can see that we can do extraordinary damage with firebombing, and it's surely more about a responsible use and creating a deterrent than it is about disarming.
Well, it's interesting you raise that point, because the reason I mentioned Japan was that these were effective, hugely effective, horrifically in 1945. We've now gone on 63 years beyond that. Modern technology, it will pale into insignificance the damage we could do now on countries that we could do in 1945 with so-called conventional weapons. So having examined the moral, economic, political, practical and indeed military reasons for not renewing Trident, why are we in fact going down this route? Can it be that our decision makers are renewing the Trident system simply because they don't want to risk, this is the key, they don't want to risk the uncertainty associated with changing the status quo, we're inherently conservative? Can it be that almost the very last major decision taken by Tony Blair before he left office was taken because he wanted to ensure that Britain's status, and that's what it's about, Britain's status as a member of the nuclear club was maintained. He wanted to leave Britain's place in the world as strong, if not stronger, than when he found it on coming into office. In my view, Mr. Blair made very many mistakes throughout his term of office. He took our country into an illegal war in Iraq. He assisted the USA in their actions in setting up Guantanamo Bay, and he moved the UK towards a surveillance society. However, the very biggest mistake, in my view, was to foist on the UK a totally unnecessary renewal of the Trident missile system. Now, as we've seen, the renewal of Trident, in my view, is immoral, it is uneconomic, it is impractical, it is militarily indefensible. More importantly, though, the biggest argument against the renewal of Trident is that we are to spend billions of pounds on a system we all know will never be used, which rides roughshod over our commitments to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. By our failure to honour our commitments to reduce our nuclear arsenal, we risk the spread of nuclear weapons systems to other states and thus to a more unstable world. The nightmare of which is the situation where a rogue state obtains such weapons. If we were to honour our treaty commitments to take a lead in reducing our nuclear arsenal, then we would have the moral and political weight to ensure that these weapons never spread around the world. It is clear that in